Welcome to Legends Lore for Sleep. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. This channel is your sanctuary for deep relaxation and epic storytelling. A place where ancient myths, legendary heroes, and captivating narratives meet the peaceful embrace of sleep. Each video is crafted as a feature-length journey designed to help you drift into restful slumber while exploring the most fascinating stories ever told. Whether you're struggling with insomnia, seeking meditation companions, or simply love mythology and epic stories, you've found the right place. Of nights, we imagine shining armor glinting under the sun, banners fluttering in the wind, and noble warriors riding into battle. But the true story of medieval knighthood is far richer and far more complex than the romantic image we hold today. It is a tale of faith and ambition, of courage and controversy, of men who lived by a code yet often broke it. In this journey, we will explore their origins, their rise to power, their daily lives, and the myths that still surround them. Knighthood was not born in a single moment. It evolved over centuries, shaped by the turbulence of war, the ideals of chivalry, and the ambitions of kings and popes. To understand knights, we must first understand the world that created them, a world of feudal bonds, crusading zeal, and spiritual fervor. Imagine Europe in the 11th century. It was a continent fragmented into countless feudal territories, each ruled by lords who owed allegiance to greater lords, and ultimately to kings. Power was local and security was fragile. Castles dotted the landscape, not as romantic relics, but as fortresses of survival. Life was harsh, and violence was common. In this setting, the knight emerged, not merely as a warrior, but as a symbol of order and protection. Knights were bound by a code, a set of ideals that promised honor, loyalty, and service. But ideals often collided with reality. Knights could be noble defenders, yet also ruthless opportunists. They could uphold justice, yet wage wars for personal gain. This duality makes their story compelling, for it is a story of human nature set against the backdrop of history. Our exploration will take us from the humble beginnings of knightly orders to their zenith of power, and finally to their twilight, a saga that continues to inspire and intrigue even today. We will uncover how knights trained, how they fought, how they lived in times of peace, and how their legacy endures in modern culture. Knighthood was more than a profession. It was a calling, a sacred bond between man, faith, and steel. The knight's sword was not just a weapon, it was a symbol of justice and divine duty. His armor was not merely protection, it was a badge of honor. And his horse was not just a beast of burden, it was his partner in glory. As we journey through this narrative, let us peel back the layers of legend and uncover the truths that shaped an era. We will begin with the birth of the knightly orders, those warrior monks who combined the austerity of monastic life with the ferocity of the battlefield. From there, we will trace their rise to power, their role in the Great Crusades, and their transformation into financial giants. We will witness their fall, a dramatic saga of betrayal and blood, and explore the myths that have kept their memory alive for centuries. This is not merely a chronicle of battles and dates. It is a human story, a story of ambition and sacrifice, of faith and doubt, of glory and ruin. It is a story that reminds us that history is never simple, and that even the most romantic figures are shaped by the complexities of their time. So, settle in. Let the echoes of the past guide you through the corridors of history. For the tale of the medieval knight is not just a tale of war, it is a tale of a world striving for meaning in an age of chaos. Chapter 2: Birth of the Knights. To understand the origins of knighthood, we must journey back to the early 12th century, a time when faith and fear shaped the destiny of nations. The First Crusade had ended in triumph. Jerusalem, the Holy City, was in Christian hands. Pilgrims from across Europe flocked to the sacred sites, yearning to walk where Christ once walked. But the roads to Jerusalem were perilous. Bandits lurked in the hills, and hostile forces prowled the countryside. It was in this crucible of danger and devotion that the first knightly order was born. In the year 1119, a French nobleman named Hugues de Payen gathered a small band of knights, perhaps no more than 9, and made a solemn vow. They pledged to protect Christian pilgrims traveling through the treacherous routes of the Holy Land. These men were warriors, but they were also monks. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, binding themselves not only to the sword, but to the cross. Their headquarters was established on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, in a building once known as the Al-Aqsa Mosque, now called the Temple of Solomon by the Crusaders. From this sacred ground, they took their name, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, or simply the Knights Templar. At first, they were obscure, a handful of men living humbly, surviving on donations. Their seal depicted 2 knights sharing one horse, a poignant emblem of their scarcity. Yet their mission resonated deeply with the spirit of the age. Europe was ablaze with crusading zeal. The idea of warrior monks, men who fought not for plunder but for God, captured imaginations and stirred hearts. The turning point came in 1129 at the Council of Troyes. Here, the Templars received formal recognition from the Church, thanks largely to the influence of Bernard of Clairvaux, a revered abbot and theologian. Bernard saw in these knights a new kind of holiness, a fusion of martial valor and monastic discipline. He praised them as a new knighthood unknown to the ages past, fighting a dual battle, both earthly and spiritual. His endorsement gave the Templars legitimacy, and soon papal approval followed. In 1139, Pope Innocent II issued a bull granting the Templars extraordinary privileges. They were exempt from local laws and taxes, answerable only to the Pope. They could cross borders freely, collect donations, and keep the spoils of war. This autonomy was unprecedented. In a world where kings and bishops guarded their authority jealously, the Templars stood apart, a transnational force loyal to no crown but to Christendom itself. As word spread, noble families sent their sons to join the order. Donations of land and wealth poured in. What began as 9 humble knights soon grew into a formidable institution, with commanderies across Europe and fortresses in the Holy Land. The Templars became the shock troops of the Crusades, elite warriors clad in white mantles emblazoned with a red cross, symbols of purity and sacrifice. Their rise was meteoric, but it was not without cost. The vows they took were severe. A Templar renounced personal wealth, family ties, and worldly pleasures. His life was one of discipline, prayer at dawn, drills at noon, and vigilance at night. He ate modestly, slept in communal halls, and wore simple garments beneath his armor. Hunting for sport was forbidden, as were ornate clothes and frivolous conversation. Even his hair was cropped short, and his beard left to grow, a stark contrast to the fashion of the day. Yet for all its austerity, the order offered something rare: purpose. In an age of uncertainty, to be a Templar was to belong to something greater than oneself, a brotherhood bound by faith and forged in battle. It was a life that promised not only honor, but salvation. For the Church assured these warrior monks that dying in defense of the Holy Land was no sin, but a crown of glory. As the decades passed, the Templars became indispensable to the Crusader states. They garrisoned castles, guarded mountain passes, and escorted pilgrims along perilous roads. Their fortresses, like the mighty Crac des Chevaliers, rose as bulwarks against the tide of war. They fought in the vanguard of every major crusade, their disciplined cavalry charges striking fear into the hearts of their foes. Chroniclers marveled at their courage, noting that a Templar would rather die than retreat. But their story was not only one of swords and sieges. It was also a story of ink and parchment, of ledgers and seals. For as their military might grew, so too did their economic power, a power that would one day make them the bankers of kings. Yet that chapter lies ahead. For now, let us linger in these early years, when the Templars were still poor in coin but rich in spirit, when their red cross was a beacon of hope in a land shadowed by strife. The birth of the Knights Templar was more than the founding of an order. It was the birth of an idea that faith could sanctify war, that steel could serve the spirit. It was an idea that would shape the Middle Ages, leaving a legacy that endures to this day. Chapter 3. Rise to Power. From humble beginnings, the Knights Templar rose to become one of the most powerful institutions of the medieval world. Their ascent was swift, fueled by faith, fortified by privilege, and sustained by an intricate web of influence that spanned continents. This chapter explores how a small band of warrior monks transformed into a global force, militarily, politically, and economically. The early decades of the 12th century were a time of expansion and consolidation for the Templars. Their recognition by the Church had elevated them from obscurity to prominence. With papal backing, they enjoyed privileges that few could rival. They were exempt from local laws, free from taxation, and answerable only to the Pope. This autonomy was revolutionary. In an era when kings and bishops guarded their authority fiercely, the Templars operated as a sovereign entity, a state within a state. Donations poured in from pious patrons eager to support the holy cause. Land, money, and noble sons flowed into the order's coffers. By the mid-12th century, Templar houses, known as commanderies, dotted the landscape of Europe. These were not mere barracks. They were hubs of administration, training, and finance. Each commandery managed estates, collected rents, and sent a portion of its income to the east, sustaining the Crusader states and funding military campaigns. The Templars' military role grew in tandem with their resources. They became the backbone of the Crusader armies, a disciplined elite force renowned for its courage and cohesion. On the battlefield, their white mantles emblazoned with the Red Cross became a symbol of steadfastness. Chroniclers marveled at their valor, noting that Templars were often the first to charge and the last to retreat. Their cavalry charges, executed with precision and ferocity, could shatter enemy lines and turn the tide of battle. But their influence extended beyond the battlefield. The Templars were trusted advisors to kings, negotiators in treaties, and custodians of treasures. Monarchs relied on them not only for military aid, but for financial services. For the Templars had mastered the art of money management, a skill that would make them indispensable and, ultimately, vulnerable. By the 1130s, the order had begun to develop an innovative system of finance. Pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land could deposit money at a Templar house in Europe and withdraw it upon arrival in Jerusalem. This system of letters of credit was a precursor to modern banking, reducing the risk of theft and enabling safe travel. Over time, the Templars expanded these services, offering loans to nobles and even to kings. Their reputation for honesty and efficiency made them the bankers of Christendom. Their wealth, however, was not limitless. Much of it was tied up in land and infrastructure, and their expenses were enormous. Maintaining castles, garrisons, and fleets required vast sums. Yet, in the eyes of the public, the Templars seemed fabulously rich, a perception that would later breed envy and suspicion. As their fortunes grew, so did their political clout. In the Crusader states, they were granted key fortresses and entrusted with critical missions. They negotiated truces with Muslim leaders, sometimes independently of the crown. In Europe, they acted as royal treasurers and envoys. Their network of commanderies functioned like arteries, carrying not only wealth, but information across the continent. In many ways, the Templars were the first truly international organization, a medieval corporation with a spiritual charter. Yet for all their power, the Templars remained a religious order. Their rule was strict, their life austere. They rose before dawn for prayer, ate simple meals, and slept in communal halls. They were forbidden to hunt for sport, wear ornate clothing, or indulge in frivolity. Their white mantles symbolized purity, their red cross, martyrdom. They were warriors, yes, but warriors of God, bound by vows that set them apart from the secular knights of Europe. This dual identity, monk and soldier, was both their strength and their paradox. It lent them an aura of sanctity, but it also raised questions. Could violence be reconciled with holiness? Could the sword serve the spirit without corrupting it? Bernard of Clairvaux had answered these doubts with eloquence, portraying the Templars as instruments of divine justice. Yet, not all were convinced. Some churchmen murmured uneasily, and critics accused the order of pride and avarice. These whispers would grow louder in the centuries to come. By the late 12th century, the Templars had reached the zenith of their power. They commanded thousands of knights and sergeants, controlled hundreds of estates, and held sway over kings and popes. Their banner flew from the British Isles to the Levant, a crimson cross against the sky. They were the champions of Christendom, the guardians of pilgrims, the bulwark against the infidel. Yet even as they basked in glory, the seeds of their downfall were being sown, seeds of envy, ambition, and fear. For power is a double-edged sword. It can defend, but it can also destroy. And the Templars, who had risen on the strength of faith and steel, would one day fall to the intrigues of politics and the shadows of suspicion. That story lies ahead. But for now, let us pause at this pinnacle and behold the order in its splendor, a brotherhood that began in poverty and rose to command the wealth of nations. Chapter 4. Battlefield Glory. If the rise of the Templars was built on faith and privilege, their glory was forged in the crucible of war. For 2 centuries, these warrior monks stood at the forefront of Christendom's struggle in the Holy Land. Their courage became legend, their discipline a model for armies, and their sacrifices a testament to their unwavering vows. This chapter takes you to the battlefield where the red cross of the Templars flew high, a symbol of defiance against overwhelming odds. The Holy Land was a theater of perpetual conflict. From the moment the Crusader states were carved out of the Levant, they faced relentless pressure from surrounding Muslim powers. For the Templars, this was not merely a duty, it was their reason for existence. Every fortress they built, every patrol they mounted, every sword they raised was in service of their sacred mission, to defend pilgrims and preserve Christian dominion in the East. Templar warfare was defined by discipline. Unlike feudal levies, which were often disorganized and prone to panic, the Templars fought as a cohesive unit. Their hallmark tactic was the cavalry charge, a thunderous assault designed to break enemy lines through sheer momentum. Clad in chainmail and surcoats of white, their red crosses vivid against the dust, they would form ranks, lower their lances, and spur their war horses forward in perfect unison. Chroniclers describe these charges as irresistible, capable of turning the tide of battle in moments. But glory was never without peril. The Templars fought in some of the most brutal engagements of the Middle Ages. Consider the Battle of Montgisard in 1177. Here, a vastly outnumbered Crusader force led by Baldwin IV, the Leper King, faced Saladin's army. Against all odds, the Christians triumphed, thanks in part to the ferocity of the Templar contingent. Their sudden charge shattered Saladin's vanguard, sowing chaos and forcing a retreat. It was a victory sung across Europe, a beacon of hope in a darkening age. Yet for every Montgisard, there was a Hattin. The Battle of Hattin, fought in July 1187, was a catastrophe that shook Christendom to its core. The Crusader army, parched and exhausted, was encircled by Saladin's forces near the Sea of Galilee. Among them were hundreds of Templars, fighting with desperate valor. When the Christian lines collapsed, the Templars stood firm, refusing to yield. Their courage was futile. Captured by the enemy, they faced a grim fate. Saladin, viewing them as fanatics beyond redemption, ordered their execution. Contemporary accounts speak of 230 Templars beheaded in a single day, a grim testament to their resolve and the merciless logic of holy war. Despite such losses, the Templars endured. They rebuilt, regrouped, and returned to the fray. During the Third Crusade, they fought alongside Richard the Lionheart, their discipline earning the admiration of one of history's most celebrated kings. At the Siege of Acre, their efforts were pivotal. Later, at Arsuf, when Richard launched his famous counterattack against Saladin, the Templars held the vanguard, their lances driving deep into enemy ranks. These were moments of triumph, but they came at a terrible cost. For every victory, the order paid in blood. Templar fortresses became the backbone of Crusader defense. Castles like Crac de Chevalier and Safed were marvels of military architecture, stone giants perched on hills, bristling with towers and battlements. Within their walls, Templars prepared for sieges that could last months, even years. They stored grain, hoarded water, and drilled relentlessly. When the enemy came, they fought with grim determination, knowing that surrender was rarely an option. Life on campaign was harsh. Heat, thirst, and disease claimed as many lives as the sword. Yet the Templars bore these hardships with stoic endurance. Their rule forbade retreat unless overwhelmingly commanded, and even then, it was considered a stain upon honor. To falter in courage was to risk expulsion, a fate worse than death for a man who had sworn lifelong vows. Their reputation for fearlessness was not without flaws. At times, zeal led to recklessness. Chroniclers note instances where Templars, eager for combat, charged prematurely, disrupting battle plans. Their fervor, while admirable, could be costly, but such was the nature of an order that saw war as a sacrament, a path to salvation through steel. The annals of Crusader warfare are filled with Templar heroism and tragedy. At La Forbie in 1244, they fought to the last man against overwhelming odds. At Mansoura in Egypt during the Seventh Crusade, their Grand Master fell in the thick of combat. Time and again, they bled for a cause that seemed ever more elusive. For despite their valor, the tide was turning. The Mamluks, fierce and relentless, pressed their advantage. One by one, the Crusader strongholds fell. In 1291, Acre, the last great bastion, was lost. The Templars fought a desperate rearguard action, their fortress by the sea becoming a pyre of resistance. When the walls crumbled, a handful escaped to Cyprus. The dream of a Christian East was over. Yet, even in defeat, the legend endured. The Templars had carved their name into history, not as mere soldiers, but as exemplars of a martial ideal. Their courage inspired poets, chroniclers, and pilgrims. Their red cross became a symbol of sacrifice, their fortresses monuments to an age of faith and fire. But glory is a fleeting crown. As the Holy Land slipped from Christian hands, the Templars faced a new battlefield, one of politics and intrigue. Their wealth, their independence, their very success would become the seeds of their undoing. That story awaits us in the next chapter. For now, let us leave the clangor of swords and the dust of battle and turn to a quieter, yet no less perilous realm, the world of money and power. Chapter 5. Wealth and Banking. If the sword was the Templars' first weapon, the ledger was their second. For in the quiet halls of their commanderies, far from the clash of battle, the Knights Templar pioneered systems of finance that would echo through history. This chapter explores how warrior monks became the bankers of kings, shaping an economic revolution in medieval Europe. The image of a knight conjures thoughts of steel and valor, But behind the scenes, the Templars wielded another kind of power: wealth. Their rise as financial innovators was not born of greed, but of necessity. War was costly. Castles had to be built, garrisons maintained, fleets provisioned. To sustain their mission in the Holy Land, the Templars needed resources, and they mastered the art of managing them. From the earliest days, donations flowed into the order. Pious nobles, eager to secure salvation, gifted lands, mills, vineyards, and villages. These estates became the backbone of Templar wealth. Managed with meticulous care, they generated income through rents, agriculture, and trade. A portion of this revenue was sent east to fund crusades, while the rest supported the order's vast network across Europe. But land alone could not meet the demands of a global enterprise. The Templars needed liquidity, money that could move swiftly across borders. And so, they devised a system that was revolutionary for its time: letters of credit. A pilgrim bound for Jerusalem could deposit funds at a Templar house in Paris and receive a coded document. Upon reaching the Holy Land, he could present this document at another Templar commandery and withdraw his money. It was a simple idea, yet profound. It allowed travelers to journey without carrying large sums of gold, reducing the risk of theft and enabling safer passage. This innovation marked the dawn of international banking. Over time, the Templars expanded their services. They offered loans to nobles, managed estates for absentee landlords, and even safeguarded royal treasuries. Kings entrusted them with vast sums, confident in their integrity. The Paris Temple, the order's headquarters in France, became a financial hub, a medieval Wall Street where fortunes were stored and transactions recorded. Their reputation for honesty was legendary. In an age rife with corruption, the Templars stood apart. Their vows of poverty forbade personal enrichment, and their strict discipline ensured accountability. This trust made them indispensable to monarchs and dangerously influential. For with wealth came power, and with power came envy. By the 13th century, the Templars were not merely soldiers. They were financiers, diplomats, and administrators. Their network spanned continents, linking estates in England to fortresses in Syria, vineyards in Spain to treasuries in Cyprus. They could transfer funds across thousands of miles, a feat unmatched in their time. Some historians have called them the world's first multinational corporation, a striking analogy for an order born in the shadow of the cross. Yet, their wealth was often exaggerated. While they controlled immense resources, much of it was tied up in land and infrastructure. Their expenses were colossal: armies to equip, castles to maintain, ships to provision. The image of limitless riches was more myth than reality, but myths have power. And in the minds of kings burdened by debt, the Templars' coffers gleamed with irresistible allure. The order's financial acumen extended beyond banking. They pioneered accounting practices, kept detailed ledgers, and enforced rigorous audits. Their clerks were trained to track every coin, every transaction. In a world where literacy was rare, the Templars' mastery of record-keeping set them apart. It was this blend of martial might and administrative skill that made them unique, a brotherhood that could fight like lions and think like merchants. But wealth is a double-edged sword. It can build, but it can also destroy. The Templars' prosperity, coupled with their independence, bred resentment. Local lords chafed at their exemptions from taxes. Bishops grumbled at their immunity from ecclesiastical oversight. And kings, especially those drowning in debt, began to see the order not as a shield of Christendom, but as a rival, a threat, a prize to be seized. The stage was set for tragedy, for in the early 14th century, a monarch's ambition would collide with the Templars' fortune, unleashing a storm of accusations and blood. But that tale belongs to the next chapter, a tale of betrayal, torture, and fire. Before we turn to that grim saga, let us pause and reflect on what the Templars achieved. They were warriors who became bankers, monks who mastered the mechanics of commerce. In doing so, they bridged worlds, the spiritual and the material, the sword and the coin. Their legacy endures not only in the annals of war, but in the very foundations of modern finance. Chapter 6. The Dark Fall. Power is a double-edged sword. It can defend, but it can also destroy. For the Knights Templar, the blade that once carved their glory would become the instrument of their ruin. This chapter tells the story of their downfall, a tale of ambition, betrayal, and fire that unfolded not on the battlefield, but in the shadowed halls of politics. By the dawn of the 14th century, the Templars stood at the height of their influence. Their network spanned Europe and the Mediterranean. Their coffers held treasures entrusted by kings. Their castles, though fewer now in the East, remained symbols of strength. Yet the world had changed. The Holy Land was lost. Acre had fallen in 1291, and with it, the dream of a Christian East. The Templars retreated to Cyprus, their original mission in ruins. In Europe, their wealth and autonomy began to look less like virtue and more like provocation. Enter Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, a monarch of ambition and iron will. His reign was marked by wars and extravagance, and his treasury groaned under the weight of debt. Much of that debt was owed to the Templars, who had financed his campaigns. To Philip, the order was not a sacred brotherhood, but a rival power, a state within his state, immune to his authority, rich beyond measure. And so, he conceived a plan as ruthless as it was audacious: the destruction of the Knights Templar. The pretext was heresy. Whispers of secret rites and blasphemous practices had long circulated around the order, rumors born of ignorance and envy. Philip seized upon these tales, weaving them into a tapestry of accusation. The Templars, he claimed, denied Christ, spat upon the cross, worshipped idols, and indulged in obscene rituals. These charges were monstrous, but in an age of faith, they were deadly. On Friday, October 13, 1307, the trap was sprung. At dawn across France, royal agents stormed Templar commanderies. Knights were dragged from their beds, shackled, and thrown into dungeons. Their properties were seized, their treasures confiscated. The shock was absolute. An order that had stood for 2 centuries was struck down in a single day. That date, Friday the 13th, would echo through superstition for centuries to come. The arrests were followed by interrogations, grim affairs conducted under the shadow of torture. In the darkness of the cells, pain wrung confessions from broken bodies. Some admitted to spitting on the cross, others to strange rites. But these were words born of agony, not truth. The charges of idolatry centered on a mysterious figure called Baphomet, a name that would haunt occult lore for generations. Yet no idol was ever found, no evidence produced beyond the tortured testimony of men desperate for relief. The Pope, Clement V, was caught in a web of pressure. Initially skeptical, he protested Philip's unilateral action. But the king's will was relentless, and the machinery of accusation ground on. In 1312, at the Council of Vienne, Clement formally suppressed the order, not by condemning it as heretical, but by citing scandal and expedience. The Templars were dissolved, their assets transferred, at least in theory, to the Knights Hospitaller. In practice, much of their wealth found its way into royal coffers. For the Templars, the end was not swift. Trials dragged on for years. Some knights were absolved, others imprisoned. But the fate of the leaders was sealed. Among them was Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, a man who had led the order through its final harrowing chapter. After years in captivity, Molay and his companions were condemned to perpetual imprisonment. Yet, when the sentence was read, they defied their accusers, proclaiming the order's innocence and retracting their coerced confessions. Philip's response was merciless. On March 18, 1314, Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charny were led to a stake on an island in the Seine. As flames licked the night sky, Molay called upon God to judge those who had condemned them. According to legend, he summoned Pope Clement and King Philip to appear before the divine tribunal within a year. And so the tale goes, Clement died within a month, Philip within 8. Coincidence, perhaps, but in the medieval mind, it was prophecy fulfilled. Thus ended the saga of the Knights Templar, a brotherhood born in piety, exalted in glory, and undone by power. Their fall was not the result of defeat in battle, but of intrigue and avarice. They perished not with swords in hand, but with chains on their wrists. Yet in dying, they entered the realm of legend. For the suddenness of their destruction, the mystery of the charges, and the whispers of hidden treasures would kindle imaginations for centuries to come. Chapter 7. Myths and Mysteries. When the flames consumed Jacques de Molay on that March evening in 1314, the Knights Templar ceased to exist as a living order. But in their death, they were reborn, not in flesh, but in legend. For the suddenness of their fall, the secrecy of their rites, and the whispers of hidden treasures cast a long shadow across history. This chapter ventures into that shadow, a realm where fact and fantasy entwine, and where the Templars live on as guardians of secrets and keepers of mysteries. The Templars were gone, yet questions lingered. How could an order so powerful vanish overnight? What became of their wealth, their archives, their sacred relics? These questions, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable, became fertile soil for myth. And from that soil sprang stories that would endure for centuries. Stories of the Holy Grail, of lost treasures, of secret societies that shaped the world from the shadows. One of the most enduring legends links the Templars to the Holy Grail, the chalice said to have been used by Christ at the Last Supper, a vessel of divine grace sought by kings and knights in Arthurian romance. The connection is tantalizing but tenuous. It first appeared in medieval literature, notably in Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parzival, where guardians of the Grail are called Temple Knights. From there, imagination took flight. The Templars, who once dwelt on the Temple Mount, were cast as custodians of the Grail, hiding it in secret vaults or carrying it to distant shores. Did the Templars truly possess the Grail? History offers no proof. Their inventories, seized during the trials, list mundane items, coins, vestments, livestock, but no sacred cup. Yet, absence of evidence is the lifeblood of legend. And so, the Grail myth persists, embroidered by novelists and filmmakers, from Le Morte d'Arthur to Indiana Jones. It is a story too alluring to die, for it speaks to a universal longing, the quest for ultimate truth, hidden from the eyes of the world. Another mystery clings to the Templars' treasure. When Philip's agents raided their commanderies, they found wealth, but not the fabulous hoard rumor had promised. Where, then, did it go? Some say the Templars spirited their riches away on the eve of their arrest, loading chests onto wagons bound for the coast. Others imagine a fleet slipping from La Rochelle under cover of darkness, bearing gold and secrets to Scotland or Portugal. From these whispers arose tales of hidden vaults and buried troves, tales that have lured treasure hunters to remote valleys and windswept islands for centuries. Oak Island, off the coast of Nova Scotia, is one such locus of speculation. Its mysterious money pit, discovered in the 18th century, has been linked, without evidence, to Templar gold. The theory is fanciful, yet it thrives, fueled by the allure of buried riches and the romance of lost orders. For in the human heart, mystery is a magnet, and the Templars are iron. Perhaps the most provocative legend is that of Templar survival. Officially, the order was dissolved. Its members were dispersed, absorbed into other communities, or retired into obscurity. but some believe the brotherhood endured, transmuted into new forms cloaked in secrecy. The most famous claimant is Freemasonry, the fraternal order that emerged in the 17th century. Certain Masonic rites invoke Templar imagery. Some even confer the title Knight Templar upon initiates. Does this signify lineage or mere homage? Historians lean toward the latter. Freemasonry arose from stonemason guilds, not crusader remnants. Yet the symbolic link persists, lending the Masons an aura of antiquity and the Templars a phantom afterlife. Other theories wander further into the mist. Some imagine Templars safeguarding esoteric wisdom, secret gospels, mystical doctrines gleaned from the East. Others conjure conspiracies in which Templar heirs steer the course of nations, guardians of a hidden bloodline or a forbidden truth. These tales, popularized by novels like The Da Vinci Code, are fiction, but fiction with roots in the fertile ambiguity of history. For when archives fall silent, imagination speaks loud. Why do these myths endure? Perhaps because the Templars embody paradox. They were monks who killed, warriors who prayed, men who renounced wealth yet wielded it with mastery. Their sudden fall, shrouded in scandal, invites speculation. And their symbols, the red cross, the two knights on one horse, are sigils that seem to whisper of hidden meanings. In truth, the Templars were neither saints nor sorcerers. They were human, brave, flawed, and bound to the currents of their age. Yet in the collective imagination, they have become more than human. They have become archetypes, guardians of mystery, avatars of the eternal quest. Chapter 8. Hospitallers and Beyond. While the Templars vanished in fire and scandal, another knightly order endured. An order that began in humility and rose to become a maritime power, a bulwark against the Ottoman tide, and eventually a beacon of charity. This chapter tells the story of the Knights Hospitaller, their origins, their transformation into the Knights of Malta, and their remarkable journey through the centuries. Long before the Templars took their vows, a small brotherhood in Jerusalem tended to the sick and weary. Around the year 1070, merchants from Amalfi established a hospital near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Staffed by Benedictine monks, it offered care to pilgrims who braved the long road to the Holy Land. When the First Crusade captured Jerusalem in 1099, this humble hospice became a sanctuary amid the chaos, a place where mercy softened the edge of war. Under the guidance of Blessed Gerard, the hospital grew into a religious order recognized by Pope Paschal II in 1113. Its members took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, dedicating themselves to the care of the sick. They became known as the Knights Hospitaller, or the Order of St. John. In these early years, their mission was purely charitable, a ministry of healing in a land scarred by conflict. But the Holy Land was no place for pacifism. As Crusader states faced mounting threats, the Hospitallers took up arms. By the mid-12th century, they had become a military order, defending pilgrims and fortifying castles. Their emblem, a white cross on a black mantle, became a symbol of courage and care. Like the Templars, they fought in the great battles of the age, their swords flashing beside their shields of mercy. When Jerusalem fell to Saladin in 1187, the Hospitallers retreated to Acre, then to Cyprus. But they did not fade. Instead, they reinvented themselves. In 1309, they seized Rhodes, an island fortress astride the Aegean Sea. Here, the order transformed into a maritime power, its galleys prowling the Mediterranean, striking at corsairs and Ottoman fleets. The Knights of Rhodes became guardians of the sea, a new kind of crusader, waging war on the waves. Life on Rhodes was a blend of monastic discipline and martial rigor. The knights prayed in chapels adorned with Gothic arches, then drilled in courtyards echoing with the clang of steel. They fortified the city with walls so formidable that even the might of the Ottoman Empire could not easily breach them. In 1480, Sultan Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, hurled his armies against Rhodes. The siege was ferocious, but the Hospitallers held firm. Their Grand Master, Pierre d'Aubusson, fought on the ramparts, his armor gleaming in the sun. When the smoke cleared, the Ottomans withdrew, leaving Rhodes unconquered, a triumph that resounded across Christendom. Yet, time was relentless. In 1522, Suleiman the Magnificent returned with overwhelming force. For 6 months, Rhodes endured a storm of shot and steel. At last, the Hospitallers capitulated, but with honor. Suleiman, admiring their valor, granted them safe passage. Homeless once more, the knights wandered until Emperor Charles V offered them a new home: Malta. Malta was a barren rock, but the Hospitallers transformed it into a citadel. They built fortresses, dug harbors, and raised the city of Valletta, a jewel of bastioned architecture. From this stronghold, they continued their war against Ottoman power, their galleys striking like falcons across the sea. The climax came in 1565, when Suleiman launched the Great Siege of Malta. His armada darkened the horizon, his troops swarmed the beaches. For months the island burned. At Fort St. Elmo, knights fought to the last man, their blood staining the stones. Yet they did not yield. Reinforcements arrived, and the Ottomans withdrew, broken and bleeding. The victory was hailed as a miracle, a turning point in the struggle for the Mediterranean. Tours. The Hospitallers had secured their place in history, but as centuries passed, their role evolved. The age of crusades waned. The age of charity dawned. The order turned its energies to hospitals, orphanages, and relief work. Today, the sovereign military order of Malta endures, not as a warrior brotherhood, but as a humanitarian force, aiding the sick and the poor across the globe. Its white cross still shines, a symbol of service, born in the shadow of the Holy Sepulchre, tempered in the fires of war, and carried into the light of mercy. The story of the Hospitallers is a story of resilience, a testament to the power of adaptation. Where the Templars fell, they endured. Where swords gave way to syringes, they embraced the change. In their journey from battlefield to bedside, they remind us that true knighthood is not only about valor, it is about service, in war and in peace. Chapter 9. Tournaments and Peacetime. When the clash of swords fell silent and the banners of war were furled, knights turned to pursuits that celebrated skill, honor, and spectacle. This chapter invites you into the vibrant world of tournaments, a realm of pageantry and peril, where chivalry was tested not on the battlefield, but in the lists. In the imagination of the modern mind, tournaments evoke images of gallant knights charging with lances, trumpets blaring, and crowds cheering. Yet these events were more than mere sport. They were social theaters, political stages, and training grounds for war, a fusion of martial exercise and aristocratic display that defined the culture of knighthood. The earliest tournaments, emerging in the 11th century, were chaotic melees, mock battles fought across open fields, sometimes sprawling for miles. Two teams of knights would clash in a free-for-all, their goal not only to demonstrate prowess, but to capture opponents for ransom. These contests were perilous. Injuries and fatalities were common. Yet they offered knights a chance to hone their skills, earn wealth, and win renown. By the High Middle Ages, tournaments had evolved into more regulated spectacles. The centerpiece was the joust, a duel between two mounted knights charging along a barrier called the tilt, lances leveled. The aim was to strike the opponent's shield or helm, shattering the lance in a display of precision and power. Points were awarded for clean hits. Unhorsing an opponent was the ultimate triumph. Though blunted weapons were often used, the joust remained dangerous. Chronicles record broken bones, concussions, and even deaths, grim reminders that chivalry was no gentle game. The tournament ground was a stage of splendor. Pavilions draped in silk lined the lists, their colors vivid against the green. Heralds in tabards emblazoned with coats of arms announced the names of combatants, their voices ringing above the din. Nobles and ladies thronged the stands, their attire a blaze of velvet and gold. For the aristocracy, tournaments were as much about display as about combat, a chance to affirm status, forge alliances, and indulge in the rituals of courtly love. For knights, the stakes were high. Victory brought honor, prizes, and sometimes the favor of a lady, a token worn proudly on the arm or helm. Defeat could mean humiliation or worse, financial ruin, for the cost of armor, horses, and entry fees was steep. Yet the allure was irresistible. To shine in the lists was to ascend the ladder of fame, to etch one's name in the annals of chivalry. Beyond the joust lay other contests, melees fought on foot or horseback, pas d'armes, elaborate challenges staged at bridges or gates, and hastiludes, playful variations of martial sport. Each was governed by a code, a choreography of blows and courtesies that mirrored the ideals of knighthood. Even in mimicry, the tournament preserved the essence of war, courage, skill, and honor. Yet tournaments were not mere diversions. They served a practical purpose: training. In an age when battle was seasonal and unpredictable, the lists offered knights a controlled arena to refine their craft. Here, they learned the rhythm of the charge, the weight of the lance, the balance of the saddle. They tested armor, gauged endurance, and measured nerve. In this sense, the tournament was a crucible, a place where warriors tempered themselves for the furnace of war. But tournaments were more than martial drills. They were cultural phenomena. They fostered the ideals of courtly love, that curious blend of passion and ritual that suffused medieval aristocracy. Knights dedicated their feats to ladies, composing verses and bearing favors into the fray. These gestures, stylized and symbolic, lent the tournament an air of romance, a theater where valor courted beauty and steel danced with silk. The spectacle extended beyond the lists. Feasts followed the contests, banquets laden with roasted meats, spiced wines, and sugared confections. Minstrels sang of heroes, poets recited tales of Arthur and Roland. Dancing filled the hall, where knights shed their armor for brocade and velvet, their swords for courteous words. In these revels, the tournament fulfilled its social function, weaving bonds of fellowship and fealty that underpinned the fabric of feudal life. Yet beneath the pageantry lurked tensions. Tournaments could inflame rivalries, provoke feuds, and drain coffers. Kings alternately encouraged and curtailed them, wary of disorder and expense. The church, too, frowned upon their excesses, condemning the bloodshed and vanity they bred. Papal edicts sought to ban them, but the bans seldom held. For the tournament was woven into the soul of knighthood, a ritual too cherished to forsake. As the Middle Ages waned, tournaments grew ever more ornate, their martial edge blunted by ceremony. Armor became fantastical, crests extravagant, and the joust a pageant rather than a prelude to war. By the 16th century, gunpowder had rendered the knight obsolete, and the tournament lingered as a relic, a glittering echo of an age when honor rode on horseback and glory tilted at the lists. In their heyday, tournaments were more than games. They were mirrors of a world where valor was currency and spectacle the language of power. They were theaters where knights rehearsed the drama of chivalry, a drama that, though long ended, still haunts our dreams. For in the tilt of a lance and the flutter of a favor, we glimpse the heartbeat of an age, a heartbeat that echoes faintly yet enduringly in the corridors of history. Chapter 10. Legacy Today. Though the age of armored horsemen was long past, the idea of the knight endures, reshaped, reimagined, and reinterpreted for new generations. This chapter explores how knighthood lives on, in modern orders and ceremonies, in literature and art, and in our collective imagination. It is a legacy of valor and service, less about steel and more about spirit, an ancient ideal finding fresh meaning in a changing world. The first place to look for the knight's legacy is not on the battlefield, but in the rituals and institutions that preserve its values. Across Europe and beyond, honors of knighthood still exist, ceremonies that recognize exemplary service rather than martial prowess. A modern knight does not earn spurs in the lists. Instead, they are often scholars, artists, diplomats, physicians, and public servants who embody civic virtue. The title has become a public thank you, an accolade for those who contribute to the common good. In this transformation, we see the essence of chivalry distilled: courage, integrity, and service expressed through deeds that strengthen communities. Parallel to these national honors, historical orders continue a lineage that traces back to medieval brotherhoods. Some exist as sovereign or semi-sovereign entities, maintaining diplomatic relations and focusing on humanitarian work. Their uniforms and insignia echo medieval heraldry, their ethos affirming the original promise that knighthood was never only about war. It was about care for the sick, the poor, the vulnerable. In hospitals, clinics, and disaster zones, volunteers wearing a white cross on red or a red cross on white carry forward a mission born in candlelit wards of Jerusalem centuries ago. Through them, the knight's identity has shifted from warrior to servant of mercy, from fortress walls to field hospitals and food distribution lines. Beyond formal orders, knighthood thrives in stories, novels, films, games, and television. The knight remains one of culture's most enduring archetypes. From the round table of Arthurian romance to the epic quests of fantasy sagas, we return again and again to figures who grapple with honor, temptation, and duty. Why? Because the knight's journey is, at heart, the human journey. It asks, how do we live with courage? How do we serve something greater than ourselves? How do we keep our word when the world makes it difficult? When a hero accepts a perilous quest, refuses to abandon companions, or stands firm against injustice, we recognize the knight's silhouette, even if the armor is replaced by a starship uniform or a sheriff's badge. Genres change, the moral geometry remains. The modern paladin might carry a pen, a camera, or a courtroom brief, but the arc of chivalry, the choice to face danger for others, endures as a compass in our narratives. Museums and reenactments keep the tangible memory of knighthood alive. In galleries, suits of armor gleam under careful light, their articulated plates whispering craftsmanship. Curators explain how helmets evolved, how gauntlets articulated, how chainmail was annealed and riveted. Visitors lean close, and for a moment, imagine the weight on the shoulders, the narrow slit of the visor, the shallow breath before the charge. In fields and festivals, reenactors tilt at quintains, clash with blunted swords, and teach curious children to read coats of arms. These living histories offer something textbooks cannot: an embodied sense of sound, heft, and risk, a connection to the physical reality behind the romance. Yet the knight's legacy also asks us to reckon with complexity. Medieval knighthood was not a simple story of heroism. It belonged to a world of feudal hierarchies, of narrow privilege, and at times, of brutal violence. Knights could be protectors and oppressors. They defended pilgrims and sometimes waged ruthless war. In acknowledging this, we avoid nostalgia's trap. The lesson is not to idealize the past, but to extract its best aspirations, the courage to confront danger, the discipline to master oneself, the humility to serve without expectation of reward. In this sense, the most honest descendant of chivalry is not a pageantry of plumes, but a code, quiet, personal, and practical. It is the doctor who stays through a grueling night shift, the engineer who designs safer bridges, the advocate who stands beside those without a voice. It is the neighbor who organizes meals for the infirm, the student who steps in when someone is bullied, the citizen who protects truth in a storm of misinformation. Knighthood, reimagined, becomes an everyday vow. I will use my strength for the good of others. I will keep my word. I will honor the dignity of all. In the language of symbols, the knight's world remains unexpectedly relevant. Heraldic shields once identified allies on a chaotic field. Today, logos, modern coats of arms, signal identity and trust in digital landscapes. The rules of courteous conduct developed in great halls have echoes in the netiquette of online communities. Respect, restraint, the willingness to listen before we speak. Even the knight's practice of an evening vigil, soul-searching before great decisions, suggests a habit of reflection sorely needed in a world of instant reaction. Pause, consider, and then act with deliberate honor. Education is another bridge. In classrooms, the story of knights invites discussions about ethics, technology, and society. Students compare the knight's equipment with modern gear, the training of squires with athletic or musical discipline, the rules of the lists with regulations in sports or cybersecurity. They discover that chivalry's heart is not steel. It is principle, transferable across centuries. A code that once guided cavalry can guide coders and counselors alike. Where, then, do we find knighthood's future? Perhaps in the fusing of its two oldest strands, courage and care. We live at a time when the challenges are less about the citadels and more about climate, public health, misinformation, and inequality. The call is not to charge, but to build, not to conquer, but to heal. The knight's sword, transmuted, becomes a toolkit, data, compassion, collaboration, wielded in service of the vulnerable and the common good. The red cross on white, or white on black, becomes not a badge of war, but a promise of aid. Finally, the knight's legacy is aspirational. It is something we reach for, imperfectly, and often fall short. Medieval knights themselves did. Yet, the reaching matters. Ideals give direction, even when we cannot fully embody them. In the quiet hours before a decision, we can ask the knight's questions. Is this courageous? Is this honest? Is this for others more than for me? And when the answers are clear, we act without trumpet or tapestry, simply, steadfastly, and well. The age of chivalry is gone, but its pulse remains, subtle and persistent. It beats in hospitals and schools, in shelters and laboratories, in courtrooms and kitchens. It beats wherever someone chooses duty over ease, truth over convenience, service over self. In that choice, the knight steps forward, unarmored, unseen but present, and the old vow is renewed. I will be brave for another's sake. I will be faithful to the truth. I will keep the peace with patient hands. I will serve.